People in America get sold the same script. Go to school, get a job, save a bit. Then as soon as you can, stop throwing money away on rent and buy a house. That's supposed to be the win condition. If you listen to most parents, most financial gurus, and definitely most real estate agents, you'd think buying a house is the smartest financial move you'll ever make. If you've followed me for a while, you know I like to do something different, take the emotion out, and run the physics. So here's my view. As simply as possible, a primary house is usually not a wealth-building engine. It's a very expensive consumption item that people market to you as an investment. And once you actually do the math the way Charlie Munger did, it becomes obvious why he rented for decades, and why I've been happy not owning some giant personal palace most of the time. I'm not saying never buy anything. I'm saying if you're still building wealth, buying a primary home in America is often the slowest, most fragile way to do it. So in this video I'm going to show you, step by step, how I think about this problem. What a normal $400 house really costs over 30 years. What happens if you route that same money into productive assets, when buying might make sense, and what I'd do instead if I were you and still on the way up. Let's start very basic. If I ask most people, how much does a $400 house cost? They say, 400. That answer is wrong by something like $1 million. So let me walk you through it the way I do it on a whiteboard. Take a pretty standard scenario in the US right now. House price, $400,000. Down payment, 20%. So $80,000 in cash. Mortgage, $320,000 at roughly 7% for 30 years. The principal and interest payment on that loan is about $2,100 a month, a bit over $25,000 a year. Over 30 years, you send roughly $766,000 to the bank, and about $446,000 of that is just interest. So on day one, you think you're buying a $400 house. In reality, over time, you've bought that same house twice. Now add all the hidden line items that nobody likes to think about. Property taxes. The US average is around 1.1% of home value annually, and plenty of places are higher. On a $400 house, that's around $4,400 a year to start. And over 30 years with appreciation, you can easily be in the ballpark of $180,000 in taxes. Homeowners insurance, say $1,500 a year. That's about $45,000 over 3 decades. Maintenance. This is the boring killer. Rule of thumb is 1.3% of home value per year. If I plug in a conservative 1.5%, that's $6,000 a year, roughly $180,000 over 30 years. That's before the fun stuff like a new roof, HVAC, plumbing surprises, foundation issues. I've seen all of that on factory buildings. It's not theoretical. HOA fees. In a lot of newer US developments, you're looking at $200, $500 a month over 30 years. That's somewhere in the $70,000, $180,000 range. Extra utilities. Houses are usually bigger and less efficient than apartments. Paying even $100, $200 a month more than a renter is another $36,000, $72,000 over 30 years. Transaction friction. When you buy, you usually pay 25% in closing costs. When you sell, you can easily lose about 6% in commissions. On a $400 buy and, say, a $600 sale, you can burn $50,000 or more just on paperwork and agents. Now, if I add the mid-range numbers, the way I like to sanity check this, $80,000 down payment, $766,000 in mortgage payments, over 30 years $7,180,000 in property taxes, $45,000 in insurance, $4,180,000 in maintenance, $150,000 in HOA plus extra utilities, $50,000 in closing costs, and selling. Commissions total out of pocket, about $1.45 million for a house you thought cost $400. And this is with pretty conservative assumptions. No divorce, no forced move, no big housing crash, no monster repair beyond the averages. Now suppose the house is worth $600,000 in 30 years. Adjusted for inflation, that might be roughly similar to $500, $600 today. So you've spent about $1.45 million over 3 decades to end up with an asset that's effectively worth maybe a third to half of what you actually paid, in real terms. If I saw that kind of return profile on a startup, I wouldn't fund it. But the real cost isn't even that $1.45 million. It's what you could have done with that money if you weren't feeding a house. This is where opportunity cost comes in, and this is where Charlie was ruthless. Let's just look at two pieces. First, the down payment, $80,000. If you put that into a portfolio of broad, productive businesses, the U.S. stock market has done around 10% a year long term. Then over 30 years, that $80 becomes around $1.04 million. Second, the monthly difference between owning and renting. Let's say your all-in homeowner cost is $2,500 a month, and you could rent a comparable place for $1,800. That's a $700 monthly gap. Invest that $700 at 10% for 30 years, and you get roughly $1.03 million. So, between the down payment and the extra monthly burn, you've given up around $2.07 million of potential compounding by choosing ownership. Combine that with the $1.45 million you actually spent, and the economic hit of owning the American dream instead of renting modestly, and investing the difference is on the order of $3.05 million over 30 years. One path ends with, I have a paid-off house worth maybe $600. The other path ends with, I have multiple millions in liquid assets that actually pay me to be alive. That's why Charlie rented for 30 years. That's why I was happy selling most of my houses at one point, and effectively owning through companies and assets instead. So if the math is this ugly, why does everyone still tell you a house is the smartest investment? Because the incentives are completely misaligned. Real estate agents get a 55% slice when you buy and a 56% slice when you sell on a $400 to $600 life cycle. That can easily be around $60,000 in commissions. Banks make hundreds of thousands in interest on a 30-year mortgage. The government likes construction and homeownership because it boosts GDP, and people who feel settled vote more predictably. So they subsidize mortgages with tax deductions. Nobody in that chain makes any money if you rent a modest place and quietly pile cash into index funds and actual businesses. There's also the psychological side. If someone has spent 20-30 years paying off a house, they need to believe it was the best possible decision. So they'll tell you, rent is throwing money away, and at least I'm building equity, even if they're sitting on a house and almost no liquid investments. On paper, they look wealthy. In practice, they can't stop working because all their net worth is trapped in an asset that doesn't throw off cash. For me, wealth is simple. Wealth is optionality plus cash-flowing assets. A primary house fails both tests for most people. It locks you into one location. It doesn't pay you unless you rent it out or borrow against it. So does that mean never buy a house? There are a few cases where I'd seriously consider owning. You're going to stay put for 15 years, and the buy vs rent math is close. You can buy massively below market, real distress, not a tiny discount, and lock in serious equity. You're house hacking a duplex or fourplex where other tenants cover the mortgage, and you're effectively living for free. You're already financially independent. You have several million invested, and buying a house in cash is just consumption that you can afford. But if you're under 50, still building your snowball, and you don't have 7 figures in liquid assets yet, I'd think about housing in a completely different way. If I were in that position today in America, here's what I'd do instead of rushing into a 30-year mortgage. I'd rent a place that's deliberately cheaper than what the bank would approve me for. I'd take the down payment I didn't spend, the lower monthly cost, and the maintenance I'm not paying, and I'd automate all of that into real investments. Broad, low-cost index funds. High-quality businesses with real cash flow. REITs if I want real estate exposure without fixing toilets. If I really wanted to use real estate, I'd look at income properties and house hacking. Not a big single-family box in a suburb that eats my capital. Later, once the asset base is big enough that work is optional, then sure, buy whatever house makes you happy, in cash if you want. At that point, it's a lifestyle choice, not a strategy. The real question isn't should I own a house? The real question is, what is the fastest, most robust way to build freedom? If a 30-year mortgage in an overpriced market slows compounding, increases fragility, and traps you geographically, that's not freedom. If renting a little below your means and investing the difference gets you to several million in working assets 10-20 years sooner, that is freedom. So here's my advice from a first-term principles point of view. Treat a primary house as consumption, not investing. Optimize first for owning productive assets, companies, funds, truly income-producing real estate. Let the people selling houses call it throwing money away on rent. You're not throwing money away. You're buying flexibility and feeding your capital into systems that actually compound. And if you still decide to buy, do it with your eyes open. Know the real 30-year cost. Know the opportunity cost. Choose consciously. I'm okay giving up a few million in future assets for this lifestyle choice. Most people never even see the trade-off. Now you do. If you want more of these breakdowns, where we strip the emotion out of big money decisions and rebuild them from first principles, subscribe, leave your own rent verse. Buy situation in the comments, and next time someone tells you a house is always a great investment, send them this video and a spreadsheet. The American dream doesn't have to be a mortgage. It can be freedom.